But was President Kennedy about as close, you would say, to a charismatic leader as we've had?
Yeah, he was to me, you know, I had no feel for Kennedy at all. Kennedy was a European. All you have to do is tabulate how many times Kennedy crossed the Atlantic and how many times he crossed the Appalachian Mountains. And you know where he belongs. And then tabulate the same thing with Johnson. How many times he crossed the Atlantic and how many times he crossed the Appalachian Mountains.
When you talk to Johnson privately, you realize the core of his memory and thought is all with domestic American things.
Absolutely.
Foreign policy seems a great effort for him.
Well, when you get in the Middle West, there is no other world but America. See? We are so big that really foreign affairs don't count. And what the heck, really? The only reason we are interested in foreign affairs is that we have to prevent a third world war. This is, to me, this has been our foreign policy since the end of the last war.
Yeah.
How to prevent the third world war. We are a learning people, Mr. Severin. You know, the immigrants came to this country, they had to learn a new language, they had to watch the games. We are learning people. We learn from experience, about the only nation that learns from experience. And we have learned our lessons in 1930. We know how third world wars start and how to prevent them. See? And the way to prevent a third world war is to pick the potential bullet and get as close to him as possible and breathe down his neck until he settles down. And every one of us knows that if France and Britain had turned Spain and Ethiopia into Vietnam in the 1930s, if they had committed there all the atrocities we supposedly commit in Vietnam, if they made all the mistakes we supposedly are making in Vietnam, there wouldn't have been a second world war, there wouldn't have been no Hitler, there wouldn't have been no gas chambers. You do not start a world war when a democracy throws its weight around facing a bullet. World wars are started when the democracies are too unprepared, too cowardly, too reasonable, too frightened, or too
humanitarian, maybe.
Too tired, you know, too humanitarian, you know. I'm not going to tell Johnson what to do because I have faith in Johnson. Johnson will do the right thing. I've lived with Johnson all my life. I know that he'll do the right thing, and he'll figure as what the great one of. Let me go all the way. He'll figure as the foremost president of the 20th century.
You're saying that Johnson will be the foremost president of the century?
Absolutely. I'm convinced. I'm convinced.
He's got to get
he
out
better be. He better be.
He's got to get out of Vietnam one way or another, doesn't he?
We will find a solution to the Vietnam problem. You know, we've never fought a war like that before. Yeah. We have to learn how to fight.
Then you think we could throw our weight around in the Middle East, for example, without making things worse?
Of course, we'll have to. We'll have to.
Have we not discharged our so-called moral obligation to Israel already many times over? How far does it go?
Well, Mr. Severide, you'll never, no country of the Occident will ever discharge its debt to Israel. Don't forget, Mr. Severide, the whole of the Occident was involved in the persecution, the humiliation, and the final annihilation of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. Not one country, with all their open spaces that are there in Brazil, in this country, in Australia, not one country threw its gates open to the Jews while escape was still possible. These Jews had to crawl on their knees to beg for visas. Not one country remonstrated with Hitler. Not one country broke diplomatic relations with him. We're all involved in it. And to me, Mr. Severide, I have a premonition. As it goes with Israel, so it will go with all of us. If Israel perishes, the Holocaust will be upon us. And history will cease to make any meaning to me. You know, I wrote my first book in 1948. When the miracle of Israel happened. Imagine, after all these unimaginable suffering and degradation, comes the miracle of 1948, when a few thousand fugitives from Hitler's gas chambers got up on their hind legs and defied 14 million Arabs. I remember, you know, I, barely literate, trying to write a book, trying to make sense of the enormity, you know, and the calamities which have befallen us. And this miracle of Israel just put heart into me, Mr. Severin.
Really?
I felt that history can have meaning. History can make sense. But Israel must not perish, Mr. Severin. Must not. As far as I'm concerned, that's the end. If Israel perishes, there will be nothing to talk about, nothing to write about, nothing. Nothing will make any meaning anymore. History has to make some meaning.
Mr. Hoffer, why do you say this so-called Negro Revolution is a fraud in this country?
You know, the Negro Revolution, if you watched it from the very beginning, it was used as an instrument by the Negro middle class, you know, to fulfill its own desires. The leaders of the Negro Revolution have no faith in the Negro masses, no concern from them. It was used, as I tell you, by a relatively prosperous Negro middle class to attain its ends. Imagine a Negro Revolution starting to move, and the first thing they worry about is desegregation. Who the hell needed desegregation except the Negro middle class who had a boy who they wanted to put in a special school? In other words, it was cut to the needs of the middle class. And the tragedy of it is that this so-called revolution not only didn't bring about any meaningful transformation of the Negro masses, but didn't give the Negro middle class what it wanted. The Negro middle class is just finding out, you see, this is the whole burden of it, see. The Negro middle class now will have to integrate itself with the Negro masses if the Negro is going to attain anything. Look, Mr. Severide, you ask any longshoreman what a Negro leader should do, and he'll tell you it's the most obvious thing, that what a Negro leader should do is to dovetail the Negro's difficulties into opportunities for growth. Let me give you an example. You go to Chicago, you go to New York, you have the Negro slums, right? You have Negro unemployed. Now, what a Negro leader has to do is to train, mass training of these Negro unemployed into skilled carpenters, masons, plasterers, plumbers, painters. He has to master the art of slum renovation. This is a whole art, this whole technique now developed. It's a beautiful technique. See? And then you organize these Negro workers into a solid black union. You understand? And then you renovate the slums. And you don't worry who owns the slums. You just go ahead and turn it into a garden. And after you have renovated the slums, you challenge the discriminating white unions to open up or get wiped out. And this is the way you get power.
How do the Negroes get the resources to renovate
Oh,
the
the resources. You don't need much resources, and money is floating around. I bet you, Mr. Severide, any time a Negro leader proposes this, what I propose now, the money will come flying to him from government, from private corporation. And they are just beginning to realize it. I've been saying that for years and years and years, Mr. Severide.
Well, now, what about some of these new young Negro leaders like Stokely Carmichael? They sound as though they're racist.
They just sound. There's nothing. They're all phony.
But it's race hatred they're preaching.
Yeah, but who's going to listen to them? Maybe a few. They are not going to get anywhere because they have these naive conception of power. They say, power, power, give me power. Nobody can give you power. Power doesn't come in cans. When I hear Carmichael, he always asking, give me the can opener so I'll open the cans of power and eat them. See? And they're all phony, these people. They do not realize that it's the long-term projects, things that you go about patiently and quietly that will achieve results. Look, once you have realized that, see, you are not going to waste your energies on hatred. You're not going to waste your energies on anything except building. I have been advocating, you know, to build yourself a community. Let me tell you something that happened. One day I came to Pier 35, I think it was, and there it was, on the wall, a poem. And I don't know whether it's good poetry. I don't know nothing about poetry, but it's darn thing sunk into me. And I think this should be the anthem of the Negro. It was called Build Yourself a City. And here's how it went. Build yourself a city. Found yourself a state. Do not cry for pity. Grab and master fate. Grab a swamp and drain it. Cut the log and plane it. Make the hill the valley feel. And on the man-made plain, breathe your last complaint. Slay your shame. Forget your name. Build, do not cry for pity. Build yourself a city. This is what I say. Build yourself a city. That's everybody, any average American sees that's what has to be done. You waste your energies on demonstrations, on riots. They do not produce one atom of pride. And now they're beginning to realize it, that the Negro has to do things by himself, that anything he is given will turn into wormwood and ashes in his mouth. You know, pride. Do you know the chemistry of pride, Mr. Severide? Pride. This is what the Negro needs. See?
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
That's it. And you don't get pride by having other people do your work for you or giving. And this is why I say now, the only hope for the Negro are these Negro veterans out of Vietnam. The tremendous performance of the Negroes in Vietnam, you know, has been generating a pride that's radiating across the Pacific and reaching into many Negro households. Vietnam is going to do to the Negro what Israel has done for the Jews. See? They are proving themselves there. And if I was a Negro leader, I would pitch a tent on the water edge and grab those Negro veterans as they come back. They are the seed of the future. They are the kind of leaders that the Negro needs. The moment the Negro is proud of being a Negro, he'll cease worrying about being a Negro. I told you that I think this is a great country because I can be a human being first and only secondly something else.